My name is Lynnette Grey Bull. I'm Northern Arapaho and Hunkpapa Lakota. I reside here at the Wind River Reservation. I wear a lot of hats, so I have so many titles. But if I was to be called anything, I take pride in being called a mother. I'm a mother of 3 beautiful children. I named my organization Not Our Native Daughters because I look at all girls and boys as my own children.
Hey, it's just Jesse today. So back in episode 2.5, I guess, we interviewed a Northern Arapaho and Hunkpapa Lakota woman named Lynnette Grey Bull, who lives just over on the Wind River Reservation. She'd been working on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls for years, and we really wanted to hear her perspective on the very real issue of human trafficking of Native American women and girls, both on reservations and off reservations in this country. I think we've said this before, but it's worth mentioning again that only 22% of Indigenous people in what we now call the United States actually live on reservations. Anyway, suffice it to say that a lot has actually happened since we did this interview back in February, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I promise that there's a reason why we're releasing it just now in full. So just hold on. So back in March, I was actually teaching a NOLS course when COVID hit. And when that course was canceled, I headed back to Lander and just sort of on a whim texted Lynnette, who lives just a few towns north on the reservation, to ask if the reservation had a food bank that was helping people during COVID. I bet folks in the NOLS community would love to help get food out there, I said. Unfortunately, there isn't a food bank, she said, but the senior center is going to try to help at least the homebound population here. The next day I sent a message out on social media asking literally just for Venmo donations to help Lynnette, and people really did show up. We raised a bunch of money and started trying on our own just to be a sort of food bank. Hannah came over from Jackson, and it worked for a while. We made a website, windriverrelief.org, which is still active, and a few weeks later, the Episcopal Church and the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole actually kind of came swooping in and with way more money and people than we could ever, think of, sort of filled the same role, which is really awesome, and that effort's continuing. We tried to integrate into that effort, but it honestly, for us, it kind of fizzled out. A few weeks passed, and I didn't hear much from Lynnette. I hoped she was staying healthy as COVID continued to disproportionately affect the reservation, obviously, a place where deaths from COVID are hugely underreported, if reported at all. Many over there still remain completely invisible to the state. I, like many, was becoming sort of apathetic to the day in and day out of just being stuck in my house. And on May 30th, I just texted Lynnette. I texted her, "Hey, how are things? Hannah and I were just thinking of you and wanted to make sure that you were doing all right." And she responded almost immediately. "Hi there. I'm good. Really good. It's about to get," and this was in all caps, "wild," which was a response that honestly kind of worried me. What's about to go wild, I asked. And she just responded with a screenshot of the list of candidates to be Wyoming's sole representative in the U.S. House of Representatives, which now is held by the 3rd most powerful Republican in the House, Liz Cheney. And who was on the Democratic side of that screenshot? Lynnette Grey Bull. She said, "Yesterday was the last day to file, and so I just went for it. I cried after I filed, and I didn't plan on being emotional, but yeah, now I'm ready to fight." Yep, Lynnette is running for Congress. If you want to learn more about her campaign platform, head to LynetteGraybull.com. But if you want to just get to know her better and learn a thing or two about the truly inspiring work that she's done for years, here it is, our full interview with Lynnette Grey Bull.
You recording?
This is Lynette.
Hi, Lynnette. This is Hannah. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us today and for being flexible with our moving around the time today. We really, really
Oh
appreciate
yeah, no problem. I'm always searching for time.
that. Us too.
Hey, Lynette, I'm here too. It's Jesse.
Oh, hi, Jesse. How are you?
Good. I think we met
Good.
very briefly during your sort of stint out in New Haven, Connecticut. But
Oh,
yeah,
awesome.
I have heard so much about you also from my friend Vivian Breckenridge, and so I'm really excited to chat.
Well, I'm glad you guys thought of me, and I'm glad to be included in this. So I thank you guys.
Yeah, so if you just want to start with sharing some of your background, how you got to where you are today, and what led you to doing the work you're doing with Not Our Native Daughters.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's a pretty lengthy answer. Is there like a time frame? I think one thing led to another. So I'll try to be as brief as I can on that. So I had a career in the finance industry, in the mortgage industry for a very long time. I thought that was my job for life. I thought that was where I was going to retire. However, I always been a statistic person. I've always been into research and data. And back in 2010, the U.S. Census Bureau released a census research and data on Native American communities. And in that data and research, we topped the worst statistics in the nation. As far as, we had the lowest life expectancy rate in Native Americans, the highest youth and children suicide rate. We live in the poorest counties, the top 10 poorest counties in the U.S., lack of employment, lack of resources. One of the things I always say, when I present or even speak is that, I'm a full-blooded Native American woman. But the statistics that hang over my head is that I am the most stalked, raped, sexually assaulted, and murdered out of all ethnicities in the nation. And no matter how many times I say that, that gets me emotional. But it also drives me. It also builds my ambition to change that statistic. So in the course of learning this data and research, kind of consuming it and really taking it personal, I chose to left the finance industry to pursue advocating for Indigenous justice. And that's when I formed Not Our Native Daughters. I wanted Not Our Native Daughters to be an organization that was Native American led, but also was able to reach out and build capacity and the missing bridges that we have in our society from federal to state and just in society in general. I wanted to build bridges of people. There was a big disconnect from the Native American communities in the U.S., and I wanted to build a capacity and bridges and dialogues and partnerships and collaborations so that we can be able to understand, for those who are non-Native, understand their Native neighbors, and also understand the challenges that we still face. And some of those challenges we face, you see in third world countries. And a lot of people don't understand that aspect of tribal communities. So I created Not Our Native Daughters in the aspect of education, training, advocacy, and policy change. And also a big part of it is collaboration and building bridges that still need to be worked on.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lynette. Something that resonated with me, I'll just say, is that the folks over in Jackson here, us included, are neighbors to a bunch of Native communities, including Wind River. And part of this podcast, we hope, is to sort of try to build that bridge or at least share these stories with folks over here too. And so I really appreciate the framing of that we're all neighbors out here and we need to figure out how to work together and build bridges to move forward. Could you, just for context, could you explain the missing and murdered Indigenous women's crisis? If you have like some statistics or size, but how long has it been happening? Who in particular does it impact, and sort of at what scale?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you so much for that question. In regards to missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls and persons, one of the things that I always say is that this is not a new thing. And just some more background, just to give you, is I did work in the human trafficking movement for a very long time. I still do. A lot of the reason of the missing, murdered Indigenous women movement stems from child sex trafficking and human trafficking. It is very closely related. So I educate on both, MMIW, human trafficking in Indian country, and just child sex trafficking in general. I spent some years working for Amber Alert, and we did child sex trafficking training, Amber Alert in Indian country trainings. And so the protection of children has always been the forefront of everything that I do. But in regards to your question, as far as, how long has this been going on? Why is it such a crisis? And just to kind of give some background on that is, the selling of North America's Indigenous women and children for sexual purpose has always been an ongoing practice since the colonial era. There's evidence that early British surveyors and settlers viewed Native women's sexual and reproductive freedom as a proof of their innate impurity, and that many assumed the right to kidnap, rape, and prostitute Native women and children without consequences. Now, this has been research. There's been some universities and some professors who looked into this. And so it has been validated that, since the first settlers have come to this country, they have always been the selling and trading of Native women and children as commodity. So, as regards of human trafficking of Native persons, as far as are missing and murdered, it has been an ongoing issue since the first settlers in the colonial era. Is because of the lack of equality and inclusiveness, we have not been the topic of it. But, the MMIW movement, Missing Murdered Indigenous Women movement, started in Canada because of their huge rates of missing and murdered persons there. And it closely relates to U.S. tribes as well. We have a high epidemic of violence against women, violence against children. Then to add to that, we have jurisdictional issues. I do a training on no clear avenue to justice in Indian country because, usually if something happens in your city or your town that you live in, whether it's rural or in the city, you can call the police, you can call 911, and those types of resources are not always available for us in Indian country because we have the government BIA that leads our law enforcement, and our law enforcement, in the BIA defense, they're not fully funded to kind of handle some of the issues, especially 911 issues and public safety issues within Indian country. So a lot of victims don't get justice because of that, whether they're missing, whether they're murdered, whether they're sexually violated, even crimes against children. So the MMIW movement, I would say, has always been an issue, but I'm so glad we're in this place in our society where not only Native American communities are talking about it, we are talking about it as a whole, as a community, as it relates to state and federal levels, and even in Congress, we were working on bills of Not Invisible Act and Savannah's Act. And so I'm glad that people are starting to talk about it, and I'm also glad that people are willing to learn about it as well, because I do fully believe that it takes community well-being. It takes all of us to build community well-being and public safety within our communities, both rural, non-tribal, and just overwide. It takes all of us as citizens.
Totally. I agree with that. And yeah, it's amazing how many people it takes to come together to start making change. And I really just want to say thank you for all the work you've been doing to help make that possible. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the biggest frustrations and barriers in your work, maybe personally, and what you're seeing structurally, as well as biggest accomplishments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of frustrations when it comes to the issues that, I would say any issue that arises and that we still face in Indian country, because it seems, and it has been the continuing narrative, that our issues are always placed on the back burner of things. So in regards to that, when it comes to our poverty issues, our lack of resources in the community, funding. I mean, you name it. You know, there's a fight in every topic in the country. And one of the things I always say is, you know, if we talk about one issue that we face, we have to talk about all the issues because they're all interrelated. It's like peeling an onion. You know, if you're going to talk about our missing, murdered Indigenous persons, and we're going to have to talk about the poverty. Why are we vulnerable? Why are we targeted? Why is there a lack of resources? You know, it just everything down the line, we have to talk about the different elements that makes those risk factors apparent in the issues that we face, especially in regards to the MMIW movement. So there's a lot of frustrations there. I guess I would, if I had to pick one, I would pick our jurisdiction issues. You know, so when it comes to felony crimes like murder and other crimes that fall under the felony statistics or felony stature, I would say, is that we have to correlate with what higher ups in law enforcement, like FBI, even Homeland Security, or for tribes that have other processes of jurisdiction, they have to go through U.S. State Attorney cases. I mean, the crimes have to go up to U.S. State Attorney's office, and so, you know, what I've seen in my history in working with these types of crimes in the country is it never results into justice. Meaning, you know, especially when it comes to federal cases, like a case that the FBI or U.S. State Attorney takes, they want a clean case. Meaning, it has to have all the bells and whistles of a clean case. It has to have victim testimonies and you know, just Native Americans in general. They seem to be, you know, when it comes to these types of issues, they're shy and timid. So it's really hard for a victim to go to the city and, you know, face a huge higher up court and testify. And most of them back out of that because it's just overall too much for them. And they're already experiencing trauma from their victimization. So, you know, there's a lot of frustrations with that, with our jurisdictional issues. Again, that takes collaborativeness, that takes talking to other law enforcement partnerships. It takes victim advocates, it takes state, federal, and state level to all come to the table and discuss how they can proceed in accordance to one another and still show respect for their sectors. But another issue of for those of us like myself who are just grassroots organizations who just want to push education, want to push victim advocacy, you know, and different, you know, wear different hats within the community, is the lack of funding, you know, the funding portion of it, you know, the nonprofit funding, the government funding of it, even state funding. Those things don't usually go to Native American grassroots efforts or organizations. They go to other things that's not related to us, and that we can't partake in that. So that's always been an issue of mine, especially as someone who has an organization that requires either donations or grants. That's another issue. But, you know, I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it to create justice and create awareness and create partnerships. So those are some of the frustrations and barriers that we face, not just myself, but I know other grassroots organizations or even advocates who just solely do it for the love of their people and the love of their community. That is a common barrier for us.
Lynnette, what gives you hope with this movement?
Justice, I would say, would be the number one priority. Since I have been an advocate, of course, I'm you know, I'm always giving stories. Today I covered a class for Professor Spoonhunter, and I covered two of her classes, and I talk on human trafficking in the country, and I talked about MMIW at CWC today. None of the students had any type of education or background in it, so I was glad to do it. But, you know, I hope that every time I speak, there is a call to action. You know, I always say this, I can't do it alone. Native communities can't do it alone. It actually takes a collaboration and partnership of outside entities to help build awareness and prevention, justice, And since I'm been doing the work, I've been bombarded with the stories of missing persons. I was sharing some statistics today in the presentation that I did this morning at CWC. And I had a combative student who was kind of challenging some of these statistics. And, I, as kindly and gracefully as I could, I went in depth in some of those statistics. Come to find out, this young man was, in his defense, he was just being triggered because his mom has been missing since 2003. So just today in my presentation, there's another victim that I know about, another story of somebody from Arapaho, somebody within our Wind River community that's been missing, and nobody has done a thing about it. I think I would have some hostility and some misplaced grief when it comes to especially your own family member or even your own mother that's been missing. And so these stories are common. I hope that these cold cases and some of these missing cases that have laid dormant for a very long time begins to see some light, or at least some attention, so that there is some comfort to these families, not just of the Wind River Reservation, but just nationwide. There's a lot of stories of missing, of murdered, with no collusion. There has been no follow-up with law enforcement or even victim advocates that was working on the case. I hope to bring those connections to those families, because that was somebody's mother, that was somebody's daughter, that's somebody's niece, that's somebody's son somewhere. And it's a heavy burden to carry, but I hope that justice will prevail in the midst of all of this MMIW awareness.
Yeah, thank you for that. You've spoken a little bit to what would be powerful moving forward and in creating justice, and some of the things you've spoken to: education, coalition building, like working with these families to make sure their stories are being heard and told, and also seeking justice within the judiciary system. And I'm wondering if there's just any other steps forward in countering this epidemic that you feel are important to highlight.
I think the education of it is a big factor in it as well, which this is what I do. I get consulted to train on these issues. But, like I stated before, I hope in the midst of me doing these trainings and education and teachings, that in line in the fabric of everything that I train on, that there is a call to action to it. I am never concerned of who wants to get involved, what their background is, whether they're Native or non-Native. I do believe it takes a community to create justice. It takes a community to organize and even leading up to legislation. And so I admire other people who want to get involved, but I also encourage just regular, people who may not be Native, may not even have many connections to the Native American community in their region, but we all can partake in that. We all work in different sectors of the community, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's with our children in our schools. We're all part of the community, and we all can play a part in building that sense of dialogue and awareness. And we can do that by making sure within our own communities and with our own realm of work, we're educated in that. Because I love the quote that injustice one place is injustice everywhere. So, I believe it takes all of us to make that change. And we definitely can understand more and grow more. And this is what leads to building a better community.
Mm. Oh, man. So whether part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women's crisis and movement or outside of it, on Wind River, what other sort of injustices do you see in your work, just as a as a Native woman living in Wyoming, what other maybe like less covered injustices are present that you think people might want to sort of attend to that might not be getting so much attention?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Northern Arapaho, and I live here at Wind River community, but I'm also Hunkpapa Lakota from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. So I've had a lot of work in the Northern Plains tribes, which cover the Dakotas, Montana, Nebraska, and Wyoming, of course. And so in my work, specifically in these Northern Plains region, one of the common factors of the lack of justice for Native Americans and for Native American communities is the racism, the blatant racism. That plays a huge factor on the injustices of the crimes and the issues that we face. It's not, people don't like to talk about racism in these Northern Plains states that I just mentioned. Primarily races in these states are Native American and white. They take up most of the population in this region. And so what I've been able to identify in my own state of Wyoming is the blatant racism. There's generational racism here. There's historical racism here. So there's a big, huge disconnect from the Native American community and to the outside, and a lot of that stems from the racism. I wouldn't say all of it in the law enforcement defense, but I would say the racism of the lack of injustices of Native American victims plays a huge role on why some of these cases have not been focused on. So, for example, if somebody from our community, even if it's a child or young lady or young man, goes missing, our stories don't make it to the evening news. However, if a young girl or young lady from Jackson goes missing, or even Cheyenne, that story will make it on the evening news. So there is a disconnect from media publication to the crisis that we face, those stories being told. There's a lack of fairness in that, and diversity and inclusion in that. And again, this is not a topic people like to talk about. It makes people uncomfortable. And, when it comes to I would say the racism, there's racism on both parts. Native Americans have racism too, because they've been treated so bad for so many years. So they also have racism, and racism on both parts doesn't heal anyone. And we have to begin as a community to talk about that so that we can begin to break those cycles in our community and create some diversion and inclusion in that. And again, these are the less likely topics to talk about, but these are one of the stems of the issues we face in the MMIWG crisis.
Thanks for sharing that, Lynnette.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's work for a long time, is figuring out how to heal that racism. It's deep here, I think. Yeah, I want to be respectful of your time and just want to give you space to, just add anything else that you would maybe like listeners to hear or know, as well as we want to give you the chance to introduce yourself, how you'd like to be introduced in the podcast. So however you want to introduce yourself, go for that. And then whatever else you'd like to add, we'd love to listen.
Awesome. Well, my name is Lynnette Grey Bull. I'm Northern Arapaho and Hunkpapa Lakota. I reside here at the Wind River Reservation. I wear a lot of hats, so I have so many titles. But if I was to be called anything, I take pride in being called a mother. I'm a mother of 3 beautiful children. I named my organization Not Our Native Daughters because I look at all girls and boys as my own children. So the statistics that I shared that I hope to work and change. I want to change that for all young girls. I want to change that for all women and children that is out there. So the protection of women and children, advocacy would probably be my headline. And I hope to honor the families and the stories of victims of missing, murdered, and Indigenous persons. Is something that I hold dear into my work. I've been invited in so many people's families and their stories, and I do my very best not to exploit that in any way, but to bring focus onto the issue and how we can change that, whether it's lack of justice or building capacity in legislative and congressional change. I'm part of an organization of Global Indigenous Council. I'm also a big part of that organization, and I'm honored to be part of that. They worked on the MMIWG Somebody's Daughter billboards that we have 12 of them. The MMIWG billboards, we designed them and collaborated and raised funding for the beginning of this year to bring attention and support of the Not Invisible Act and the Savannah's Act, and that still hasn't passed in Congress. But now Global Indigenous Council Executive Director Rain Bearstands Last, he directed a documentary on these stories of missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I'm glad to say that we have a screening here in February 29th, and it hasn't been quite confirmed, but I believe we will have it at CWC here in Riverton. We will have our screening, and this will be the 4th screening. So we're continuing to build awareness on this issue. I definitely put a call to action out there for everybody to get involved. If you don't know how to get involved, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to talk to anybody who's interested on the promotion and education and awareness of missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Thank you so much, Lynette. I just want to really give you a lot of appreciation and love for the energy and heart and hard work that you put into this, and really want to say thank you. And I'm excited to keep learning from you and would love to stay in contact, and hopefully we could come down to Riverton for that screening. That sounds really awesome.
Yes, I will be sure to extend the press release and everything once we go ahead and solidify the date. But yes, I would love to have you there. And just as a side note, I will be there February 4th in Jackson. So if you guys are there, I would love a quick meet or a quick coffee with you guys. But yeah, I'll be in town.
That'd be awesome. We'll put it in our calendar.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks so much, Lynette.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for this dialogue. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Us too.
And we'll be in touch.
Okay, awesome. You guys have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
If you want to learn more about Not Our Native Daughters, then follow them on Facebook. And if you want to learn more about Lynette's congressional run to unseat Liz Cheney, follow the campaign on Facebook or Instagram at Grey Bull for Congress, or head to the campaign website at LynetteGreyBull.com. Just imagine a Congress filled with people with hearts like Lynette. Anyway, thanks for listening.